Men are so dominant, they're also the best women.
I don't judge people based off gender. I base it off whether they're an asshole or not.
Testes. 1, 2, 3.
Everyone knows if you ignore something, it means it's not real.
Here's a narrative. We are born. We are assigned a sex at birth. We grow up, enter puberty, and emerge relatively unscathed.
Welcome to the Epoch Podcast, your weekly dose of mental foreplay. My name's Matt.
I'm Jen.
I'm Austin.
I'm Christina.
I'm David.
And this week's conversation worth having is about sex and gender. Dirty gender. So.
Why is it dirty?
Oh, did I mix them up? Did I mix up sex and
Right.
gender?
I don't know anymore. I thought I knew, and all I know now is that I don't know.
Touche.
Yeah.
Well,
You know,
you know?
we've been trying to record this episode for a while now, and every time I dug into this, yes, I felt no less confused about people's perspectives. It was because I think like there's just different camps that are trying to claim that different words mean different things. So I think having a common language for everything is really important. So when you tell me that biology between a man and woman is the same, I'm a bit confused. Not in a sexual way. What kind of issues did you guys come across?
yeah. Well, I feel like defining or at the top of the episode, maybe even touching on this little illustration that we were kind of looking off of, it might be kind of helpful. Gender identity versus gender expression versus biological sex versus sexual orientation. Like, there's a lot of layers to...
Like ogres.
Ogres have layers.
Yes.
Onions.
Yes.
Now I'm thinking about Shrek.
Peeling his skin off one layer of epidermis at a time.
Yeah, so if you're not familiar with what Tina's talking about, it's the genderbread person. And so it's kind of an interesting visual. I think it's one that a lot of people can connect with because it has a picture of the gingerbread man.
Whoa.
But
Okay.
he's been renamed gender. And so sexual identity comes in your brain, and there's a little picture of his brain. And then the orientation, there's a picture of his heart. So where you orientate comes from your heart? I don't know. And then the biological pieces, the gender, the genital area.
The Prince sign there.
But I think that's the one that confuses me the most because some people will say, well, I was born, one sex and I'm really the other. But there's that biological piece where I'm like, well, you were given these parts. And so I don't know if that's where we want to go with this at the moment or whatnot. But
So the heart piece was supposed to be how you feel towards other people. Your
'Cause
sexual orientation.
My genderbread man says attraction.
Yeah, attraction.
ew, attraction. So there's different versions of this
So-
gingerbread man you're saying?
Your gender identity is how you
I don't know how
in
he
your
identifies himself, but probably.
this
I
is
know
the way this is the way that I think a lot of people think about it now. I don't know about a lot of people, but the people in these discussions. Gender identity is how you in your head think about yourself. Gender expression is how you demonstrate your gender based on traditional gender roles, through the ways you act, dress, behave, and interact. Biological sex refers to the measurable organs, hormones, and chromosomes. And then sexual orientation is who you are physically, spiritually, and emotionally attracted to based on their sex and gender in relation to your own. So it's a big soup.
That leads us to Chef Boyardee's LGBTQ
Oh,
hold
yeah.
on.
plus. Did I forget one? Or 72?
Yeah, I know. It's
This scale, this one, man, I wonder which one I have because this one actually has a scale.
Yeah, this is scale too.
We
It's just the least complicated
but-
one.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Which is weird. But I think when you put it on a scale, like somebody says they're gay, or is there a scale that says, well, you're really gay?
There is. Or wait.
Is there?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, because
Isn't there?
going
Because-
from gay to bisexual, I'm sure there's.
There's supposedly
Oh, okay.
bisexuals in the middle, obviously, and then there's heterosexual and homosexual on the other ends of the spectrum. So if it's a sliding scale, you can be really, really gay or really, really straight,
Hmm.
you know?
That's what she said.
What does yours say?
Or everybody's one time in college thing or something,
Okay,
you know?
like did you? Yeah.
Everybody's.
Everybody, I obviously do not mean everybody.
Gender identity, personality traits, jobs, hobbies,
Yeah.
likes, gender expression, style, grooming, clothing, mannerisms.
Gender expression is how you express yourself to others. Gender identity is how you think of yourself in your mind.
Anatomical sex, body hair, chest, hips, shoulders, hormones.
All right, anyway.
What? You get
Those
to read
are-
everything and I don't?
Those are different.
Crap.
I was reading definitions. You're reading like
I want to look smart too. I want to look like I actually
I'm
did.
not trying to look smart. I'm just I don't know. I mean the way that this is laid out on the diagram or whatever does make sense to me as a way of trying to understand
Sure.
Agreed.
the way people think or interact. And speaking of interacting, like I feel like that is probably the biggest issue with all of this is just how we interact with people. Because ultimately, understanding someone's gender, at least up until this point, has been part of what helps us know how to interact with them, which is kind of weird if you think about it, but yet it's just, yeah, that's the way it is. You interact differently with men than women generally, especially like if you're married or single or like all these different things. We've been brought up that gender is part of the way that we know how to interact with people. And so I think that when I was looking into this topic, that was a big reason that it mattered. Not only just in relating in like general life, but the way that you think about yourself is also in relation to how you interact with other people. So when you're thinking about pronouns and all that kind of stuff, it really doesn't matter other than when you're relating with people. To me, it just all comes down to how you relate to each other. I don't know. What do you guys think?
Well, I think I mentioned language and why it matters to have a common language set up. And I think for maybe, dare I say, the majority of people, at least I grew up. I'll speak for myself. I'll stay there. I'll stay in my box. Man and male have been synonymous for the most part. Female and woman kind of meant the same thing. There was no distinction being made on my part. Am I alone on that one, or is that a fairly common stance on this call right now?
Agreed.
Yes.
Agreed.
Agreed. Other than, I think if you're being really, really specific with the words, yes. But like, as like roles and all that kind of stuff comes into play, or you can say like someone is feminine or all those kinds of things.
So those would be gender expression, and that's where I would say
Right.
yes. I definitely made a distinction between masculine and feminine.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas a man can be a feminine man can exist just like a masculine female can exist.
Mm-hmm.
I was very aware of that, but if somebody said, "Well, I identify," I was born a male but identify as a female, I'd be, oh, what? Like that wouldn't have registered for quite some time.
Thinking about this right now, it's like even using the words masculine and feminine could, I feel like, now be construed as sexist, and I don't know. It just everything is all messed up. That's the thing. Everything is all confused.
Right. I think even to the point where in our local area, the city is actually changing the names of workers. So there's no longer like a construction man, but or like trash man, but it's like construction worker. And like I was driving and listening to the radio, and they were no longer policeman but police force, and actually being very proactive in changing the adjectives to take out those verbs. And so to be more inclusive is kind of the big thing.
So-
How can we include everyone? Which I'm all for inclusion, but
Right.
I don't know at what cost at some point, because it gets down to really nitpicky things there. And, who are we going to offend, or who are we not trying to offend? And no matter what, you're going to offend somebody. So how can we, I don't know, get the most bang for a buck?
Well, on the biological sex aspect of it, I got a few stats dialed up here. I just want to rattle them off so I can put my phone down. And so how common is intersex? If you're unfamiliar with intersex, is just, what you would not, biologically not male nor female. So hypospadias, somebody's going to get me on that one, which means urethral opening in the perineum or along the pineal shaft. That's 1 in 2,000 births. Hypospadias, again, taking a shot there. The urethral opening is between the corona and the tip of the glans penis. That's 1 in 770 births. Total number of people whose bodies differ from standard male or female, that's 1 in 100 births. And then not XX and not XY chromosomes, that's 1 in 1,666 births. So that said, I don't think those numbers are statistically enough to say that they're normal. I think it's okay to say those are abnormal situations. They're 1 in 100 is not normal. So is that
No, but I thought the numbers would be a higher difference. I think that's kind of
Well, yeah, but like it's the ambiguous genitals, for example, is like 0.05 from what I had seen %. So
the thing with this is that we're talking about the physical,
right,
Mhm.
and there's obviously
and
all the
there's,
inside.
There's obviously that's not quote unquote the point, if you will,
Well, but
because there's a whole.
it is a
there's
way that you
whole-
can actually establish a statistic, though.
and there's many more that I didn't list off too. But
Yeah.
This issue isn't strictly a physical issue, though.
Right, but it helps to be, because everything else, if it's in your head, is really subjective, whereas this is not so subjective.
So for
So
me,
then you can see,
when I saw those statistics that 1 in 2,000
Mhm.
are born with both sets of genitals, and that they are arbitrarily often fixed at
Mhm.
birth.
Mm.
And I saw probably similar things that you guys saw, an episode where they interviewed some people that, there was one kid who was in college and his whole life felt like he was a girl,
Mhm.
and he wasn't. And then finally found out that when he was a baby, he was born with both. And it was, the choice of the doctor was to give him a penis and not a vagina. And
Mhm.
it made all the sense in the world. And he's like, I've always felt like a girl. And yet, when they do that, obviously then come the hormones that go with those genitalia and everything like that.
Mhm.
So as someone who was born and raised in church, and kind of that, I would dare say that judgmental, you're a sinner and you're just all depraved and the
Mhm.
devil is ruining the world, and was taught that that's kind of really how you just mark it up to a bunch of sinners going to hell. When you realize that 1 in 2,000, that's I've been to churches that there's 2,000 people.
Mhm.
There's at least someone in there. There's a good chance that odds are that someone in there was born with both sets of genitalia.
Sure,
Now the question then becomes. Go ahead.
I do want to clarify my words. When I said normal, I didn't want to say it wasn't statistically relevant, because if you expand, to the population of the United States, and you're talking about hundreds of millions of people, all of a sudden that population gets quite large. So, which is kind of what you were saying with it.
But normal, as in like,
Right.
it talks about like 10 fingers and 10 toes type of normal.
Sure.
Yeah.
Right. Well, and but when you expand that out and you have a few 100,000 people in the U.S. alone who were born biologically between the two, non-binary, if you will, and you get people who are like, I don't know, I've always kind of felt like a girl. I always felt like, and it was really easy for me for years to be like, oh, you're just a Satan worshiping devil demon something or other going to hell. And now it's like, you know what? Wow. Even biologically speaking. So I know this discussion is more than just the biological, but for me, that was kind of the door into like, oh crap. Like that's a lot of people, a couple 100,000 people in the United States who have a very valid case to say, I feel like I'm in the wrong body. Suddenly the ability to be kind of to mock people or judge them or whatever kind of gets down to like, wow, I really probably should listen to people and kind of hear them out. At least I do think I will go. I don't think it's too harsh to say that a lot of people who are their sexual orientation is homosexual or whatever, like there's so many I've known that will admit to you that it all began with sexual abuse as a child. Right. So I think there's realities to a lot of the perspectives that judgmental religious people have, and there's realities to a lot of perspectives that people who are in that community are trying to bring awareness of. So it's not to say that anybody's all wrong or all right, but it definitely kind of opened my eyes to like, oh man, I can't just. That's why I wanted to study this whole thing, because I felt like, you know what, it's too big of a deal, and there's too many people, in a lot of pain over this for me to just kind of nonchalantly just throw it in. It's no big deal. Just, get over it, you whiny babies. Like it is a reality that there's some really hurting people dealing with, and when you look at it from a biological level, it just kind of opens up to so much more. For at least that's what it did for me.
Can I ask a question here to those that actually did the research in regards to this? Well, in this specific fact, are they fully functional both ways?
It's all across the board.
Yeah, sometimes yes, sometimes no.
Yeah, because I'm curious, like if it would be the case that somebody would not have been able to be fully functional and yet still feels, say for example, like they should have been a male or a female or whatever.
Right.
Go ahead.
Well, the documentary I saw is sometimes that is the case, that it is, and that's why the doctors choose one or the other. And then one of the things that was interesting is they're now starting to see that it's actually not even the chromosomes; it's the brain activity and the hormones in the brain that actually are a better indicator of what sex a baby should be. But that's only very recent technology, and they're still not even 100% sure about it.
Do you remember where you came across that? Because I did not.
I want to say I feel like it was like a 60 Minutes documentary or something, and it was a brief comment by one of the doctors.
The thing is, like, so many things can affect hormones, so that's a can of soup to open up too.
Sure. Yeah, you have some BPAs and
literally.
Oh, all of a sudden you're getting some
soy.
Estrogen.
I mean, there's a lot there.
See, the thing here, though, that I feel like, I don't know, but I have an issue with this. Maybe need to work it out. I don't know, but like what they say is that when they're a baby, you're assigned a gender
in your body. What are you talking about?
Everything that I've read in regards to this say you're arbitrarily assigned a gender based on your physical features.
You're talking about the doctor? Or what are you talking about?
Yeah.
Society.
Oh, it's a boy. So you're assigned the male.
Right.
You're forced into the male side of things.
Oh, so that's how you think of it now too?
No, that's what they're saying. That was my quote. That's the narrative that the lady was talking about.
Right.
that you're born and you're assigned. Here's a narrative: we are born, we are assigned a sex at birth. We
Yeah.
grow up, enter puberty, and emerge. Blah 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 blah. Throughout all this time, our gender identity corresponds with the sex we are assigned at. We are assigned at birth.
Right, which is differentiating gender identity versus sex. The sexual sex makeup. I don't even know.
Biological sex. Yeah.
Biological sex.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I kept wanting to say
So, I
sexual
mean,
orientation, but that's not it.
So that's why all these actors and people, whatever, say, they I guess don't treat they asexually treat their children. They don't give them gender specific toys, and they let them dress however they want to, so that you're not assigning a sex to them, so that they can choose what they want to be, I guess.
Yes.
And that's where I'm like, well, yeah.
Do you think that creates more confusion, or what do you?
I do. And I'll put my
It's just-
conspiracy hat on for a moment, and I think
Mhm.
that there's probably a bigger entity out there trying to push a different, I guess, agenda with that. And if we can get celebrities on board to not push our families in one way, we can have more confusion, and it's easier to crowd control confused people.
Jen, did we just become best friends?
We've always been best friends. I've got my
Yup.
tinfoil hat. I'll mail you one.
I
He,
think
he probably has a
correct.
few in his closet. Yeah.
Yes.
I actually, it's kind of funny though. Side note: I ran across someone who was saying that, suggesting that intersex people are returned to the first Adam.
Oh,
That's an interesting thought, right?
That's an interesting
What does that mean? Return to the first Adam?
So, like,
Well,
I need more.
supposedly
If-
Adam had both.
because
When
Eve
he
came
was
from
first
Adam.
created, he had both.
I've
Male
never
and
heard
see, that was
of
never
church.
said in the inside of him. Yeah. Let's see.
Interesting.
Yeah, I definitely haven't heard that in church either. But it is
So
interesting.
his rib had
interesting
a
to think
vagina.
about.
I'm so confused.
And on that
It's coming
day,
out of here.
God assigned him a male name, or a man name,
Mm.
literally Adam.
Right.
I feel like there's a variety of ways that you can look at this whole discussion we're having. I know, take it back a decade or so, when the fight for gay marriage was really, really going. I mean, maybe it still is now, and I'm just oblivious to it. I think it's past most places. The libertarian in me was conflicted by the Christian in me. And I didn't quite know how to. I was on the sidelines for most of it. If pushed, I might fall back on the Adam and Steve thing back then. But if I were to apply that, well, eventually I just being like, it's freedom. Why is government involved in marriage in the first place? Let whoever wants to marry whoever. I don't care. But if I look at what you're talking about with assigning gender, David, it's almost like you're saying like those parents are giving more freedom to a child by not corralling them in a certain way, saying that you will be you will be expressed masculinely. You are a boy, or you are a feminine girl, or they're just letting them go and seeing what happens. And freedom, when freedom is an option, it means that people have choices, and people don't always want choices. I don't know. I don't know if do we give kids choices? Is that something we want to do?
I think
See, there's
trying to set the table for a discussion.
There's a difficulty though, because do you give the choice to a child that is not fully developed, that does not fully understand the decision that they're making? And then, you also have the whole gender reassignment surgeries and stuff like that. So, if you're going to give them the choice to be say the little girl thinks that she's a boy, or, I mean, for all practical purposes, let's talk in that direction.
The little female.
The child with female parts thinks that she wants to have male parts, and she's 10 years old, when is it all right to have that kind of surgery? I mean, I know, I guess, oh shoot, sorry. I guess you have the whole question of whether, you know, the parts can grow as the child grows or whatever, but so
I think that, I mean, obviously people change a lot
yeah,
over their
I mean,
lifespan,
well,
and
and you have this child hasn't even gone through puberty yet, which is
I was just going to bring that up. I coach 8th graders right now, and I can't imagine, like, just I recognize in all these kids that they're in different places in development. So the fact that you would begin to mess around with hormones before they've hit this huge part in their life where hormones are going to begin to spike, it's like, boy, I don't know how you do that.
Right. Well, and I think I remember Joe Rogan had Adam Ruins Everything, that dude. They were talking about this, and they were talking specifically about this, where a child wanted to have the sex change before hormones kicked in, and it was, what is right biologically for this child? Is it biologically okay for them to get a different, hormones that their body is naturally already processing, and to diffuse that and give it something else? Or is it better to cut off the natural if that's where they want to go? And I think it's hard because children at that age don't fully understand what they want or what they need, and given kind of freedom of not having guidelines on decision making for small ages, where they don't fully understand the consequences or how it's going to affect them later. Like, and we don't really know either. Let's change all their hormones and stuff, and what about 30 years from now we're going to have a generation of people with different effects because of these things that we don't really understand and really know the effects of. So
yeah, I have a friend who has a girlfriend who was maturing too soon, and so they gave her things to stop the puberty. She was basically going through puberty at like 9 or something. I don't know the age, but it was too soon, so they gave her stuff to stop it. And now she's 23 and has a litany of medical problems, serious medical problems.
Which is unfortunate, because currently that's the average age. I would say it's probably like 10, 11, which is where puberty hits, but it's also, what are we putting in our bodies? How many hormones are we putting in our bodies? And then, it's not acting normal in the history of medical that we've documented. Well, we've never documented the effects of GMO and all this other stuff that we put in our bodies. And then we wonder why, babies are developing that have intersex kind of things, because our food that we're putting in body is just not natural.
Oh, hasn't that been like all of humanity though?
Hasn't what been?
Babies that are born with intersex.
Sure.
Yeah,
Right.
but who knows the ratio?
Yeah, I mean, yeah.
To your point there about just, I don't want to jump forward to the around the circle part at the end of the show, but one of the points I was going to get to is that it's a call for compassion. It's hard enough to, I look at the boys I coach, the girls I coach, it's hard enough to be a child of that age, let alone a child who's sticking out for reasons that they probably don't want to stick out for, maybe, and not, having identity issues. Man, like, how much more grace and compassion is asked for there, as opposed to what was given instead, which is, finger pointing and shaming and telling them they're wrong or whatever it is. I don't know, man.
I just think, like, with all the body positivity stuff that's going around, and like, love yourself and love your body and all this stuff, like, why couldn't that be the same case for this kind of stuff? Like, why do we want to change things? Why could we not have more of a push for letting things be okay? Like, I think what it really comes down to is people pushing back against gender roles, and how, like, traditional gender roles, and how they don't want to be put in a box of masculine and feminine and all that kind of stuff. And they don't want to be made fun of if they're expressing differently. I don't know. I just, the statistics also on let's see. I'm thinking that transgender isn't even the right term anymore. I can't remember what it is, but people that change sex, biological. No, I guess. Sheesh. I don't even know what to. Yeah,
gender
Like
reassignment.
sexual reassignment surgery.
reassignment surgery. Yes. Like the statistics would say that, largely speaking, they don't seem to be more happy. Like you'll see the stories of people that are, but suicide and stuff like that is super high in those cases. So I think like a lot of it just really comes down to the insides, obviously, and being able to feel okay about who you are and how you express yourself, like your actual identity. I don't know if you guys are familiar with body dysmorphic disorder or body integrity identity disorder. But there are people who feel that they should not have like an arm or a leg or something like that. They actually, it's something that really bugs them a lot. The fact that they're able-bodied, basically. And so there are people who like cut off their own arm or leg or whatever, or try to get a doctor to do it. But for the most part, no doctors really will agree to do it, for obvious reasons. But
Why?
well, because it's
Well, I think that one's couched
not a good
firmly under mental illness, correct?
well, the thing is, it doesn't seem really all that different to me, in the sense that the way that they think about their body is negative. And what they're saying with this, and it's a very small percentage of people, but what they're saying is that possibly the brain hasn't mapped the body out correctly. Like there's possibly the neural representation of the body is messed up, is like improperly wired. And so I was thinking like there could be even something to do with that, with gender and stuff. So it's just such a multi-layered issue. And that's where what I was talking about in my hook, where I was like, if you ignore something, it's not real, right? But no, actually, there's a lot of reality to it. Like Austin was saying, it's easy if you don't really look into all the ins and outs of things to just shove it off like, oh, it's not really that big of a deal. And yeah, it is certainly a much lower percentage of people. It's definitely a minority, but minorities matter too, obviously.
What?
And it's just, I think a lot of where people have been frustrated is that it does cause inconveniences. It does mean that we have to change things in society and the way that we function, practically speaking. Like the whole thing with marriage, the whole thing with how we relate to people. Like there's so many parts to it that it's kind of inconvenient. It feels inconvenient. And so I think that's where a lot of people have pushback as well. Because it's a difficult thing.
See, when we were having the whole conversation in regards to gay marriage, I didn't really ever have any issues giving them the full rights that a married person would have under the law. I mean, it makes sense. I don't necessarily agree with the lifestyle, but it wasn't like I was going to impose or have the Judeo-Christian worldview imposed on them if they wanted to live that way. Where I had the issue was why the word, or why the concept of marriage, and why it needed to be that.
So you were suggesting like a civil union was your thing? Is that what you're?
Yeah, I mean, if they want to commit to each other and live that way, that's fine, and they can have all the rights that a married person, quote unquote, hetero married person would have. But what really got me, what I didn't understand was what I felt was somewhat of a hijacking of the Judeo-Christian religious term of marriage, and why that particular word needed to be redefined to include.
Because in all of this kind of stuff, to me it stems from like an insecurity of not feeling good enough, not feeling accepted, all that kind of stuff.
But they were not going to be, quote unquote, accepted by the people that.
Sure.
The people that they did not care about because they had a completely different worldview than they did. Why did they need to be accepted by those people?
Because
you know what I mean?
People are their moms and dads and their brothers and their uncles and their teachers. And I think it all comes down to words and meanings. And a marriage is traditionally this loving relationship, and that to put it as a civil union, or even like, what's it after your common law, like after you've been together for like 7 years, you get those benefits in some states. And so it really comes down to, I think, the separation of state versus religion. Whereas why do people want to get married? Well, there's benefits. You've got the medical benefits, you've got tax benefits, you've got those pieces.
But see, Jen, the issue here is marriage not a religious term?
I don't know that it is.
I don't.
Not currently, I wouldn't say.
I mean, but it's been made definitely because of the state being involved. It might have been like origin, but
like,
it's now not.
Where would the Constitution get that term from, or that concept from, other than the Bible?
The word marriage derives from Middle English marriage, which first appears in 1250 to 1300 CE, or Common Era. This is in turn derived from Old French, marier, to marry, and ultimately Latin, maritiere, meaning to provide with a husband or wife, and maritiari, meaning to get married. That's Wikipedia. So.
Yeah.
What the thing is, like, to me, it just felt like we want it. It just felt like we're gonna shove it in your face, religious people.
Of course, there are some of those people, but at the bottom line, though,
to me, because why not call it? Why not have exactly the same rights that a married person has? Just call it something different. Just call it.
It should. If you're taking that view as marriage is like this religious thing, then you should never get married with a state seal or a state, because it's supposed to be separated. So, on paper, marriage shouldn't happen. You want to get married in a church under God, great. But then when you come to the state, then you're doing whatever you're calling it as an adjective for any kind of union of whatever you're orientating.
The thing is, to me, that whole thing just kind of got blurred, because you had, like what you were saying, common law. But I mean, essentially, just call it what it is. They were living together and they were committed to each other. And later, after we've been together for 7 years and we get the state tax breaks or whatever the crap we're going to get. And so they're not sitting there thinking, well, this needs to be named this to be valid.
But I mean, essentially, if you do the time, it's going to be labeled something.
Yeah, but that's what I'm saying.
You do the time, pay the crime.
You do the time. But the issue to me was calling it, you have to call it this, because if you don't call it this, then it's not valid, and we're not happy if you call it this. And I felt like during that whole time,
it felt like you're offering a second class status for it,
right?
I mean,
That's what, yeah.
Somebody from that community.
You could say that, but do people that are common law, quote unquote, marriage or whatever, do they feel like they're a second class citizen?
It depends.
That's their choice.
And you have all the people that are atheists that don't see that was the issue. Like, if they were atheists, they didn't do the whole marriage thing. They just live together because they don't believe in marriage. Because I think, if I'm not mistaken, I think marriage is a religious thing. It comes from a religious thing, and to me, that's where I was like, why does it have to be this? And I feel like. Yeah, that was just my beef with it. the whole, I think the pushback right now is that people feel like they are being, that they feel like this is an intrusion on their lives because you have to now think about how you address a person based on something that they think.
Sure.
And
it's the pendulum swinging back in the other direction. I mean, when you have things going a certain way where some people are being marginalized for a long amount of time, eventually marginalized people
yeah,
get tired of it.
Exactly, yes.
But then you have things like, if I think it's a Canadian thing at this point, where if I call you by the wrong pronoun, I'm legally liable if you've told me to call you something else and I don't. I think that's considered hate speech in Canada, I think.
What if you don't ask?
What about nicknames?
Well, gosh, if people are hoping that you're going to assume the right gender,
I think that I think is part of the problem, is that a lot of people are assuming, like, I think of that video, I think it's at GameStop where
it's ma'am.
That one.
Well,
I don't even know how to describe it.
When you start legislating this kind of thing, it's a slippery slope, to be honest.
Definitely.
Sure.
I have a question, and I'm going to throw it towards Austin. So, one of the quotes that I kept seeing as I was just doing a quick search is, as they talked about gender, sexual, I'm not sure. But the quote, it does. The quote, and it's just standalone. So I'm just going to throw it out there. And the reason why I'm throwing it to Austin, because I know we've talked about it in the basement, and I kind of had an idea of the answer, but then society is saying that the soul has no gender. And so I was wondering what your thoughts were on that piece. Right? Like that was like multiple memes of the soul has no gender. And I'm like, I didn't. I'm just going to throw it your way. That's all you.
I think anybody who kind of tries to go internal with this discussion can easily show their ignorance of spiritual truth if they think that, how do I put that? I mean, what they're trying to say is that it's the soul of a person. I believe what they're trying to say is that the soul of a person can identify as male or female, that is not the gender of the soul. I would say if you understand, female energy or male energy, to give an example, I was having a conversation with a friend of mine about a month ago, and his many of you guys know him, Ronnie Hirama. His observation was that I'm very much a man, but I do it in a female energy, right? Because there's those men's men, and then there's more sensitive, more, he's also he's very much a man, but he does it in a female energy. And then we've all known very powerful women who live in a male energy. They're very typically be the more that alpha type woman and stuff like that. So the energy of who and what you are doesn't even necessarily, it can be a whole nother level of discussion about male, female. It has nothing to do with sexual orientation or gender or anything like that. So it's one of those, when somebody starts to try to have a sexual gender discussion and then they talk about the gender identity of the soul or the spirit, in my mind, it's you're conflating issues that unfortunately our English language falls short from having additional words to work with. But to fast forward to the end, I very much believe that the soul is female and the spirit is male, and most people don't even believe we have both. Most people, soul spirit is the same thing. No, it's not. We all have a spirit, a soul, and a body, and we are male and female internally. I would, if you're made in the image and likeness of God, I would ask you, what gender is God? Right? Is it a man or a woman? Right? So,
well, I mean, the Bible says he, so. he,
Right.
obviously.
Well, back in the day, our English language, everything, he was a pronoun that you used when you didn't know. It was like an assumption. Like, I remember that was like in the 60s, 50s. Like, that's.
Well, in Genesis, it literally says, "Let us make man in our image and likeness."
Yeah.
In the image of God, He made him male and female.
Mhm.
He made.
Yep.
It doesn't say like.
So you're saying
So-
that's soul and spirit. And
Mhm.
Yeah,
no
well, but it's
body
also
yet.
it is male and female. It is both energies. Now, I would define that as soul and spirit. Spirit being the male, and soul being the female, and that each one of us has both, because God has both. And that again, now you run. I think it starts to run shy of enough words to use, because it is a whole different type of discussion about what gender the soul or the spirit might be. I have a soul that is female. I have a spirit that is male. We all do, I believe. And there's way more evidence. I should do an episode on the New Age Christian podcast about it. I'm writing that down because it is so much more than just an entry level discussion. But yeah, that's my short take on it.
definitely. Yeah, when I think about different things like that, when there's this thought, this trendy thing, and then everyone kind of jumps on it, and then all of a sudden there's this group of people going down this road based off of a faulty start point or a faulty, guideline, and that's how we kind of gotten to where we are, I kind of think, because of the baseline being off kilter just by a little bit. And I guess your perspective on where the baseline is and off kiltered is all subjective as well. So there's that.
What do you guys think about the idea of fluidity on these sliding scales? The idea that it's not a static, you achieve your point and you are there for the rest of your physical life.
I mean, I think it's obvious that hormones can change and things that play into those hormones change. And that doesn't, I don't think that means that you need to be identifying one way or another. Like, I think it's helpful to recognize that those things change based on environment, based on what you're thinking about, based on the kind of input you're having in your life, based on your experiences. All those things affect how you feel. I mean, I think what people in general need to recognize is how much all those things play into how you feel, and that you can choose how you feel to some extent based on what you're putting in your environment. Obviously, there's a lot of things that have happened to people that they didn't choose. And I think, to me, that comes down to, like, could I ever choose to be male? Could I ever choose to be attracted to such and such? I don't know. It doesn't feel like it based on my current position. But I also understand, I can see the perspective. I don't know. I can see both sides, but I think that people just need to recognize how much plays into all of that. As opposed to, I just am this way. I am fluid. I am whatever. Well, why?
I think for me, my wish would be that we could get past the fear and the offendedness and worry about one thing. Are people healthy and whole?
Right.
If you went to a LGBTQT, all of that, the alphabet, and I don't mean to butcher it because I'm unsensitive. Literally, I don't know what the acronym is and what the proper order is. But if you went to a convention and you had an anonymous poll where people filled out a questionnaire, and on that questionnaire you asked if someone had been sexually abused, right? Or if they had been physically abused or emotionally abused, and if you for childhood trauma, there's a test called the ACE test. I think it's the ACE test. It's 10 questions. If it's 12, if you had them fill that out, and then you went to like a Christian convention or a straight person's convention, quote unquote, and you had them do the same thing, and would there be a correlation? I tend to think there would be, and it's not meant to be judgy. It's just meant to be genuinely, like, I think there's a lot of abused people who, when something happens to them, they turn for comfort, and things the wires get crossed, or neural pathways. I mean, we've learning so much about neural pathways and thought patterns, and when things happen, people literally don't know how to think differently. And so it is not meant to be insensitive. It's not meant to say that, just because you're gay, you're broken. It is to say, if you're unwhole, if you are hurting, if life is very difficult and you're depressed or anything like that, I could give a shit about your sexual orientation. I want to make sure you're whole and healthy. And then if you still stay gay, great, good on you. Then you're whole and healthy. Like, I tend to think that a lot of the communities and the hurt, the offended culture that we have, if we could just care about the people and let the chips fall where they may with the behavior, I think we would find a lot more shifts and a lot more openness to, you know what, I'm this way because I don't feel safe with the other sex. I'm this way because, it's all I ever learned, and it's what I was taught that I was worth. Just whatever it is, I think we could, if we cared for the people and they understood, like, look, I really don't care what you do with your private parts. I really don't care who you kiss or where you kiss them or whatever. I just want to make sure you're healthy and whole. I think if people knew that, then they could have a more honest conversation and not constantly look to be offended or defend themselves or defend their choices with such vehement anger and hurt and venom. I think you could have a whole lot healthier conversation. But it takes trust that the people up on stage who are having you fill out a questionnaire aren't judging you. They're trying to help you. And I think by and large, when people have been hurt, that initial round of trust is the hardest thing. So it's we have a lot of work to do, but
totally.
I think if the church, totally. I think that's what I've been thinking the most, is that if the church could stop looking at all of it as, oh, it's an attack on God, it's an attack on religion, it's an attack on all this stuff. Like, no, it's just people trying to make sense of themselves, trying to understand themselves, trying to fit in a world, trying to be. Like, that's really at the heart of it, I feel like. And if we could stop making this separation of, oh no, they're against God, then I feel like we would be able to get a lot further.
I mean, if you look at it, it's just basically the same thing happened the other way with the, Defense of Family Act or whatever the crap it was called, that they tried to legislate that you couldn't get married. There was no homosexual whatever marriage. And I mean, instead of trying to legislate, instead of trying to change people's behaviors and just love people, and I think that was the biggest that was the biggest mistake. I mean, responding in kind, to be honest.
Trying to leverage the law as opposed to
wow,
imagine that. To me, I was thinking about it just now. The phrase came in, how big is your God? If the church is God, if the church believed in the God that they say that they believe, then they would not have had to react in the way that they did.
Right. I think the heart of it is when Christians get obsessed with people's behavior, they are Pharisees. That's the truth of it. And Jesus was a friend of sinners. They literally accused him of being a drunk and a partier because he was fun and he hung out with bad people, and he loved them and made sure that their mental stability and their soul health was what he cared about. The behavior, you take care of the inside of the cup, the outside will take care of itself.
Mhm.
But the church could give a rip about the inside of people's cup. They want to look at their behavior. They want to protect themselves from scary ideas. They want to protect their children from frightening people, and not teach their children how to go into dark places and be the light, and not themselves have the courage to love people who are living a behavior that they don't agree with, and realize that they're also, but all the parties involved could use some mental healing. They could use some soul searching. They could use some love.
Mhm.
And that to me is that's where the libertarian concept melds for me so well with my spiritual perspectives and New Age Christianity. Is it is about that individual freedom. And I think, and then that's the libertarian side. Do what you're going to do. Just don't harm other people. And then I bring in behind that my spiritual care of whatever you do with your life is one thing. How are you feeling? How are you doing? Where are you at? Where's your heart? Where's your emotions? Where's your sense of self? And let me help you take care of that, because I care and I love you. And then what you do after that is up to you. And I guarantee you, you will change. Jen, you were saying, kids. We were talking about kids earlier in the podcast. Like, does a 10-year-old girl know? Do we want them to? Do they really know what they want? I laughed. I don't know if you saw me laugh. I'm like, does a 20-year-old girl know what she wants? Does a 30-year-old girl know what she wants? Does a 40-year-old girl or boy? It's not about women.
I was just gonna say, what about guys?
Do any of us know what we really want for the rest of our lives?
Yeah.
Like, the best we can do is, what, I think I want this. So making permanent decisions it's a crapshoot either way. And we treat children like they're not as smart as adults, but guys, adults are pretty stupid too. We're also not fortune tellers, and so on and so forth. So it is a much deeper. It's not a hard issue for me anymore, because it's easy for me to love people, and it's easy for me to look at somebody who's hurting and go, you know what you might be dressed weird, you might be confused, you might be really hurt. Let's talk about the hurt. Let's forget about the other stuff. This is the one that I think could actually help the rest. But that's just me.
Well, I think we've been going for about an hour, so maybe it's time to go around this circle on this thing. I mean, I feel like there's so many areas that are still untouched, but
Definitely.
maybe a weird.
Well, it's a conversation starter.
For sure. And I think we've covered a lot of grounds, and we've gone a lot of different directions, and kind of just touched our toes in some things. And if you are listening and you're like, I don't agree with you at all, or you guys are dumb, or maybe you're like, yes, right up my alley. Thanks for listening, for one thing. And I want to say thanks to the group, because I know we tried to do this a couple of times. We were all like, yeah, let's do it. And then we're doing it. And there's that piece of, there's bravery in taking that first step to talk about these things. And if you have an opposing opinion, that's great. Like David and I chatted a little bit, and we had different meetings on marriage. And that's what, this community is all about, is having ideas, sharing them, and having a rational discussion about it. And as I think about this topic a lot, I don't know where I settle, and I know sometimes I go this way and that way, but I think Austin has it when he says, are you happy with yourself? Do you love yourself? And giving that to the rest of the people that you're with. Love is the answer to all things, and I know that's kind of cheesy, but when you treat people with love, they'll treat it back to you, and we'll all be a better place.
Our tagline, conversations worth having. This, of all the episodes we've done, this is, for me, is one of the top 5 conversations worth having in its broader context of how do we start healing a broken world? Because this is just one symptom of how many subgroups are out there fighting for equality, screaming for recognition and honor, and whether it's race, whether it's sexual orientation, whether it's nationality, this type of conversation is a spearhead into a much broader issue, and that is, how do we honor all people and at the same time heal and address, like to say, hey, these things may actually be symptoms of a problem, not saying that you're the problem, but that, are you healthy? Are you happy? You know, the fruit of the Spirit, love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, gentleness. Is that what your life looks like? If it doesn't, then let's talk about that and let the chips fall everywhere else. And I appreciated the ability to kind of look into this a little bit more. I kind of knew intuitively I needed to, because it was definitely one of those things that I have brushed under the rug for years. And, you know, shame on me. And I hope I haven't offended people over the years. And I'm not one of those that's like the offense police. Like, it's hard, it's scary to have these conversations and worry that somebody's going to get offended. Please, if you have been offended, if we've laughed at the wrong spot, or if we've messed up an acronym or whatever, like, it's not on purpose. We're genuinely trying to understand something that hasn't yet very closely touched our lives. And, you know, we'd love to hear from you on the different feedback channels we have. And we'd love to learn how to honor you better. So thank you for listening. And, you know, I've enjoyed it. It's been pretty sobering for me.
Just thinking about all of this, the main thing that I come back to is, how do you interact? Like, what's the line? How do you figure out how to interact with someone when, from an outside perspective, you can see things that they are believing or agreeing with, or allowing in their lives that are hurting them, but that's not something necessarily that they can see or hear. And I think really it just all comes down to, you can interact with someone on the level that your relationship is at, and you have to earn that trust and earn that respect to some extent, I think. And so, again, as Austin was saying, let's not be so concerned about the outward stuff, about the behaviors, but just get back to relationships. And if you haven't earned the right in someone's life to speak into those things, if they don't have that kind of relationship with you, then just love them, period. And don't try to be telling them how to live their lives, basically.
Yeah, I think this basically all kind of boils down to how we treat other people, and treating other people the way that we would want to be treated, with the leeway that we would want to be treated with patience and obviously love. So, yeah. Kind of sucks to be the next to last one, because everybody already gave all the good opinions.
How do you feel for
Sorry,
me, the
Matt.
last one to go? No. No, I alluded to it earlier. A couple things in my closer here, but you know, thinking about marriage back, you know, a decade ago, the thing that got me over the hump on it was, what business is it of mine? I mean, if somebody doesn't believe the same way as me, does that make them a bad person? Does it make them unworthy of honor?
Mm-hmm.
And in all of that, though, what is my role? If I'm caring about anybody's business, it should be my own. And so what's my role? And that's just to love people. And in that, you know, my position on gay marriage changed. And I think change is healthy. It's if you know, I know Austin says it all the time, but like, if you haven't changed in the last 5 years, like, what are you doing? Were you just that good that you couldn't, that none of your positions were deserving of change? I think a real problem in all of this, and sometimes it's from people who tend to be stuck, is like they find a moral position and then they weaponize it.
Mm-hmm.
And they use it as a pedestal to step upon and look down upon people for. And that's I would say that's not okay. On the flip side, I think it's interesting to watch people and again, I'll try to put this sensitively, but to fight for labels, where so much of my part of my life, I'm like, just don't label me. Like I am me, but I realize that there are official forms that people have to fill out all the time where some of this stuff hits much closer to home than it would for me.
Yeah.
But the idea that for example, like I talked about in Canada, where you could be in legal trouble for not giving acknowledging somebody's label properly. I don't know. I don't think that's the way to go either. I think that's the pendulum swinging too far in the opposite direction. I don't know. All is default. Compassion. I talked about earlier. Compassion. So love people and try for a bit to imagine what it's like to be in their shoes. Try to imagine, if you're a dude, to try to imagine somebody telling you, well, you're supposed to be attracted to dudes and you're wrong for not being attracted to dudes. And you should, your attraction to women is sick. It's disgusting. How dare you? And, you need to live somewhere else. We don't tolerate your kind around here, or you're not welcome in our organization, or whatever it is. Like, imagine, if you're a woman, flip the shoes on that one. And it doesn't feel good. So I would say don't perpetuate that. Perpetuate love. This was a conversation worth having, and I thank you guys for joining us. And yes.
That's a new one.
Thanks for joining us and making it to the end of this thing. If you made it all the way here, you can catch up with us and interact with us on our social media platforms at Epic Ideas. Our Patreon account is findable on there, in the show notes, all that kind of good stuff. If you're interested in supporting the show, and love you guys. We want to honor you as listeners and viewers as well. So thank you.
Ciao.
Peace.